And then here's this total unknown, Jakey Lee, and then you hear him ripping through that first song and you go, this is gonna be good. Hey there, Robert John Hadfield here from Audiomover, the company that takes your old audio and videotapes and converts them into digital. And we've got some really cool classic vinyl to talk about here again today. And this, of course, is Ozzy Osbourne, Bark at the Moon. This was a really important album in Ozzy's career because this was the first studio album he did without Randy Rhoads. Of course, Randy Rhoads had been in the first two studio albums. He'd played on Blizzard of Oz and Diary of a Madman. And then, of course, unfortunately, Randy died in a small plane crash while they were on tour. And then this was the next studio album. Now, he did put one other album out before this that people are a lot of people know about. It actually sold quite a bit. It was called Speak of the Devil. And so it was a live album that just basically had all of his old Black Sabbath songs on it, which is kind of interesting because a lot of us, we were pretty young when we first started hearing about Ozzy Osbourne, you know, us teenagers. I mean, I was, 12 or something the first time I heard the name Ozzy Osbourne. And I didn't realize that he had previously been the singer for Black Sabbath. Of course, the first time I was introduced to Black Sabbath was on the album Heavy Metal, the soundtrack, and it was Mob Rules, and of course Ronnie James Dio was the singer for Black Sabbath, and so Ozzy didn't even make that connection. So, you know, we were listening to Blizzard of Oz and Diary of a Madman, and then he puts out this live album with all these Black Sabbath songs, and all of a sudden you find out, oh, wait a minute, he was the original singer for Black Sabbath. So after Randy Rhoads died, for various reasons, they decided to do this live album where it was just going to be all these Black Sabbath songs. Now, so what Ozzy ended up doing is he brought in different players to play on that album that had not been on his studio albums. So he had Tommy Aldridge come in to play drums. Tommy Aldridge had been in Black Oak, Arkansas, and anyway, he'd actually opened up for Black Oak, Arkansas had opened up for Black Sabbath a bunch of times, so he was kind of familiar with Ozzy and Black Sabbath's music already. Brought in Brad Gillis, who was the guitarist for Night Ranger, and then of course Rudy Sarzo, who had been the bass player in Quiet Riot with Randy Rhoads, and you know, I think Rudy got credited for playing bass on the previous album, although I don't think he did. There's a bunch of confusion over what really happened on those first couple of albums and who got credited and who didn't, and it apparently whatever was on the records wasn't really entirely accurate. So anyway, so those three were Ozzy's band when they did the Black Sabbath stuff on Speak of the Devil. Well, then it was time to come into the studio and do another studio album, which is what this was going to be. Well, Brad Gillis went back and played with Night Ranger. Rudy Sarzo actually went back to be with Quiet Riot, who was just about to explode, of course. I mean, that's when Metal Health came out and they became mega, mega huge. And so what Ozzy did then is he got a new hotshot guitar player, and that really has kind of been his signature for how has been successful all these years. I mean, Ozzy is an interesting character, there's no doubt about it, and his music's kind of interesting, and he's got that unique voice, and you know, but as a solo artist, you know, he started off with Randy Rhoads, Jakey Lee. I mean, today he's got he's had Zakk Wylde for a long, long time, you know, being that guitar player. He just had these guitar heroes, these guitar gods, really, that played on these albums. And so he brought in this hotshot guitar player named Jakey Lee. He wasn't, I don't think, considered a guitar god at the time, but when you heard him play, you go, whoa, this guy was really, truly amazing. And actually, we can flip it over and talk about the members, but I remember this album cover when I first saw this. I don't know why, but it really kind of freaked me out a little bit. And I thought, I can't take that home to my house, and my family's going to see this. My mom and dad are going to freak out when they see this. But anyway, it was just Ozzy kind of demonstrating his little craziness, I guess. I don't know. It's in the end, I've had friends that I've talked to about this, and I always thought that was stupid, and I always thought it was creepy, but maybe it was stupid. But it was Ozzy being a little bit nuts, which he's known for, looking that way at least. And then here he is on the back again, Bark at the Moon. And anyway, just Ozzy dressed up like a werewolf or something like that. So anyway, down here, if you can see this, yeah, you can see that sort of on the video. You'll see the band members, of course, has Ozzy as vocals, Tommy Aldridge as drums. We already talked a little bit about him. And Tommy Aldridge has become kind of, you know, he went on and played with Whitesnake. I mean, he's kind of been all over the place. You see the list of people that he's played with, not even just in the studio, just played live. I mean, he's been all over the place. Very, very prolific drummer. Don Airey, keyboards. This album had keyboards way more out front than the other albums did. And Don had been he actually had toured with Ozzy, and he's not listed as a band member, but if you go back even on Ozzy's first album, Blizzard of Oz, if you go way down on the list of credits, he's actually listed as the keyboardist. So he wasn't. He'd actually played with Ozzy all the way back to Blizzard of Oz. He just wasn't part of the band. Here he actually got some credit as being in the band. Bob Daisley, bassist and backing vocalist, and Bob Daisley had been with him for a while. Bob Daisley had played with Rainbow. Bob Daisley had played with Uriah Heep, and he did play the bass on Diary of a Madman, although he's not credited for it. That's what I mean. It was a little strange what they did there, but anyway, then he came back and played on this album, and I think went on and played on several others. And then here we go, Jake E. Lee, guitar and backing vocals. And Jake E. Lee this was the first time anybody really became aware of him, although he had played in the early days of a band called Rough Cut, who I actually loved. I think it was their debut album. I loved Rough Cut. I thought they were so cool. But he didn't play on that one. But I mean, he was in the early days of Rough Cut. And he also had played in Mickey Rat, which was what the band Rat was called before they became Rat. They took the Mickey off and then just became Rat. So Jake E. Lee had been in the kind of heavy metal scene in LA for a little bit. And then there was this whole thing about going through these different auditions, and apparently it got down to the point that George Lynch had even been brought in to audition for Ozzy. Of course, he kind of went back and played with Dokken, and then Jake E. Lee somehow just got the gig, and then ended up playing on this album. And it's kind of interesting because Ozzy takes credit, writing credit for every song on this album. As a matter of fact, when we open it up, you'll see on the bottom that it says that he wrote all the songs, which when you go back now and everybody tells the stories, he didn't write these songs. At least if he did, it was very minimal. Jake E. Lee, for the most part, wrote most of this music, especially and including the title track, which is the one that got really popular, Bark at the Moon. And he's maintained that ever since. But apparently what had happened is they'd recorded this album. Ozzy's always a little bit out of it when you hear these old stories. He's drunk and high and not really paying attention to what's going on. And Sharon somehow had told him that he was going to get writing credit. And then at the last minute when they're finishing the record up, they say, well, here's your contract. And it basically says that he's not claiming any writing credit and whatever. And it's kind of an important thing, not just to just tell people, you know, that you did it. There's actually money involved when you're a songwriter, because you can get royalties on music when it gets played on the radio or when it gets used in different things, because you get different types of publishing royalties based on what level of involvement you had with the song from a writing standpoint. And so when you turn over or sign away all of your writing credit, it actually can be a real serious financial thing for you, especially if a song gets really popular. You can lose a ton of money if you don't have that credit. So he certainly lost a lot of money in the process because he didn't get writing credit on this stuff. But in later years, everybody's kind of admitted that, yeah, it really was Jake E. Lee that had written, it was a significant part of the writing of this album. So if you go down this track list, Bark at the Moon, as soon as you heard that opening guitar riff, da, 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 I mean, you realized Ozzy had picked himself up an incredible guitar player. We were all waiting to see what would happen because, of course, you had Randy Rhoads on those first two albums, who was this, today he's just a legend, right? And then who was this guy going to be? Then he had Brad Gillis, which was kind of weird. Where'd this Brad Gillis guy come from? And then here's this total unknown, Jakey Lee. And then you hear him ripping through that first song and you go, this is going to be good. And it really was. I mean, he was just fantastic on this album. It was amazing. You're No Different really, really slowed down. Now You See It, Now You Don't. I didn't care much for those two songs. They weren't great. Rock and Roll Rebel was a pretty cool tune. It actually got a little bit of airplay too, and it also has a really cool guitar hook in it as well. Center of Eternity, it's got kind of that, like he's a little bit trying to capture the original Black Sabbath song intro, because it has the bell and it just has a little bit of that, kind of eerie sounding thing, and it has it has this choir sound in it, and anyway, that's what that. So Tired actually got some airplay too, and that was kind of a slow song. I am so tired, so tired. I thought it was a pretty okay song as far as Ozzy's slow songs go. Slow Down was just a pop song. You can tell whenever they were putting that song together, I think they were trying to maybe even make a hit single, and it just, in my opinion, just doesn't work. It sounds a little sappy and silly. I don't even remember really Waiting for Darkness, but overall the album was okay. I don't think it rose to the level that a Diary of a Madman did. Diary of a Madman's a classic. Every single song on there is really, really good. This one was, it was pretty good. There's a lot of good stuff on it, but it wasn't as great as the stuff that had happened on the previous two studio albums. And then you go down here, you see who got production credit, but then it says mixed by Tony Bongiovi at Power Station, New York. And I've talked about this guy before. He started the Power Station. The Power Station is a super famous recording studio back in New York. And Tony Bongiovi had built it, basically put it in place. Now, Tony Bongiovi, this is actually John Bon Jovi's cousin. And the reason it's written different than John Bon Jovi's last name is because John Bon Jovi actually changed how it was written to make it more commercial. This is actually how John Bon Jovi's last name is actually supposed to be spelled, Bongiovi. But Tony Bongiovi he'd worked with like the Ramones, he'd worked with Talking Heads, of course he worked with John Bon Jovi, and so he was a really pretty prolific guy in the music industry, especially because he owned that studio, and then he was the guy that mixed this album. So anyway, that was that's an interesting connection right there, this Tony Bongiovi guy. So let's take a look on the inside of the album, and you can kind of see what this looks like on the inside. I thought this inside of the album was not great, especially because, and this was part of the enjoyment of albums. I actually keep all my records in plastic and I take them out. In this case, this is the first time this thing's ever been out, I think, in 40 years, whenever I bought this thing. I think I might have taken it out for one other little show I did once, but I mean, I usually don't touch these things. They sit in plastic, and I'm a little bit crazy that way. But I didn't like this inside thing, not because I didn't like the colors, although I didn't, but it's on paper that fingerprints so easily. And this is part of the experience with albums, is all these different types of texture and paper and what have you. And this particular one, the stuff they chose actually gets fingerprints on it really easily. So anyway, here, what they did here is they just put the song list and lyrics. And then it says here, this is what I told you a minute ago. It says all songs written by Ozzy Osbourne, which is not true. As time's gone on and more people have realized it and all this stuff has come out, a lot of this stuff was stuff that Jakey Lee put together. Jakey Lee and Bob Daisley, really, the two of them, I think, ended up writing most of this stuff, and Ozzy would just kind of come in and do little bits and pieces here, but this was, that's who really, really wrote the majority of the music on this album. So let's go ahead and flip this over, and you'll see on the other side here, here's the band. There's Jakey Lee, young guy, and Bob Daisley, who, like we said, here's the bass player. Ozzy, of course. There's Tommy Aldridge, the drummer, and then you had Don Airey, who had, like I said a minute ago, had actually played keyboards on the live stuff, and it even played all the way back on the first album here. And so, and it says here, once again, all songs written by Ozzy Osbourne, which like we said a minute ago, is apparently not true. And Jake E. Lee was a really, really big part of this album and making it successful. And so, hey, if you like these videos, please like and subscribe to this channel. And like the video, leave comments. If you have other videos that you'd like us to do, other records, we have a huge collection. We can pull them out. We actually have already done a few that people have asked for, and we're happy to take your recommendations on albums we can talk for. And if you want to support what we do here, the best way to do it is actually go to audiomover.com, and if you have old audio and videotapes, start an order and send them into the studio where we can convert them to digital for you. And if you don't have audio, or if you don't have old audio and videotapes that you need to convert to digital, I bet you know somebody that does. And so, you know, what you could do is go on Facebook, post, you know, tell people about Audiomover, tell people that we make these cool videos, send people, share this video with other people, and it will let people know that we're there, and then that helps support these crazy fun little videos we do if you like this stuff. Anyway, with that, have a fantastic day.